Once you've ruled out the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampirism, and there's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hello everybody, this is the Paranormal UK Radio Show, broadcasting to you on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Irene Allen Block. And I haven't got Mark with me today because he's got a cold. He's got a head cold. So here with me today is a station manager, and I've got to behave now because I'm out on the network, but I still answer to this man, Stephen Saccadelius.
I just got promoted. That was news to me, but anyway.
What are you then?
I don't know. Station manager last I heard, but I don't know exactly what that person does, you know.
Station manager. Okay, well, at the moment I'm messing up here as usual. Sorry there, Stephen. No, you are a station manager and, oh, blow it. Right, okay. I messed up there. I'm sorry about that. And it's just thrown me. My recorder came straight on, so I've had to turn. Sorry, people. Sorry. Anyway, being an old lady like I am, that's no excuse. We had an email from somebody, and I've got to mention this because I want to put things straight. We had an email come through from somebody called Mark. Mark, I won't say his last name, but Mark. He could be Matthew. He could live in Austin, Texas, for all I know. And he seemed to think, or the email said that I was ruining the show because I sounded drunk. Now, I do not drink alcohol. If I want to have even a glass of wine, I have to have an antihistamine at least 30 minutes before because I'm allergic to alcohol. The nearest I can get to alcohol, which is usually in a blue moon, but the nearest I can get to alcohol on any day is to suck a grape. So that is my reason. I may sound drunk, but then again, I am also a pensioner with over 50 years of smoking. So my voice is not going to sound like a nice 21-year-old. So I'm sorry, people, but this is the way it is. I'm an old smoker. I've given it up. I regret doing it, but I have got that smoker's voice.
Irene, now you've used up all the excuses. What am I going to use?
I don't know.
There's nothing left for me.
But this man wasn't very nice with his comments in the email. And another thing, you send an email onto the Paranormal UK Radio Network, it's going to end up on my desk because that is a shared account. It's a forwarding account and it shares out to everybody. Also, you may not want me on the show. I don't care. This is my show. This is my show and this is my network. I run it. So, if you've got any qualms, go and suck a grape. But do not make assumptions about people if you don't really know people.
And you have some grapes you could send them to.
Yeah, I have. I've got grapevines in the garden. But the point is, people make assumptions about other people. This world would be a lot better place to live in if people just kept their noses clean and didn't jump to the first conclusion about somebody. Right, that's my rant over. Getting back to that upset me. I've got to admit, it upset me. But then, 2 days ago, I got a message from somebody that made me realise that it doesn't matter if this one person doesn't like me. You know, he can click off the button as far as I'm concerned. But this other person that messaged me the other day said that he loved the show, he loved the work we did. He's been listening to us for 2 years, and the fact that he listens to our show has kept him together in a very bad time in his life. His daughter's been ill, and that made it all worthwhile.
Wow.
So we do these sort of shows for you sort of people, not for the other sort of people. Right, that's my rant over. So how are you, Stephen?
Oh, I'm good. Very good, thank you.
What? Okay. So what's the weather like there?
Oh, well, it's not snowing today, but there's snow all over the place. I've been here a couple years now. I was in the South, in South Carolina, and I moved up here a couple years ago to Maine, Portland, Maine, and so I'm kind of enjoying the snow. It's novel to me.
Well, as in Maine, the weather in Maine is meant to be very much like here in the UK, yes?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I haven't been there, so I don't know, but it's where I am is on the coast, and this is southern Maine, so it's not nearly as bad as it is inland and further north. It's just enough to be fun, I would say.
Well, here we've had frost, hard frost, and fog. I looked out the back door last night when I let the dogs out for a wee in the garden. It was just beginning to get dusk, and this fog was just rolling across the fields. And it's like that film. You know that film, The Fog? It's
I don't, yeah.
And it was scary. I'm standing at that back door going, oh my God, hurry up, you know? Anyway, but that's it. The weather's not been that absolute brilliant. And but we have to put up with it. It's that time of year, isn't it? Right, our guest tonight, Craig Bryan. Craig Bryan wrote a book, and we're going to be talking about that book today, The Shadow Man of Echo. Oh my God, I knew I would get mixed up on this word. Accrington. Craig was born in Lancashire, and he's grown up in that area and been interested in all these sorts of things, folklore, the paranormal, since he was a child. Hello, Craig.
Hello, how are you?
I'm messing up, aren't I?
It's pronounced Accrington.
Accrington,
yeah.
But you see, that's in the north. I'm the south. I'm from the south. We can't get our tongues around a lot of the words from the north. Lancashire is hard enough for me. I can say Carmarthenshire because it's, you know, in Wales, but Lancashire, that is very difficult as well for me. But Accrington. Oh, before you tell us about your book, how did you get into it? Did you have an experience of your own?
Well, I did, yes. I've always been interested in ghosts and the paranormal, right from being a young child. My maternal granddad was very good at telling ghost stories, and I remember as a very small child we used to sit around the old range cooker in my grandparents' house, and my granddad used to tell me ghost stories. And so really I've always had an interest in the paranormal ever since I was a very small child. I've had a few experiences myself, and I've also spoken to quite a number of other people whilst researching the book, which I've subsequently written. But the first experience that I had really was when I was probably in my late teens, probably around 18, 19, which is an awful long time ago.
It's that age we all want to be again.
It is, and
except when we were that age, then we didn't want to be that age.
That's very true. I think there's a saying, isn't there, that we, you know, you'd like to be that age again, but have the wealth of knowledge that you have as you get older. So, right. But yeah. The first experience that I had was one that I've talked about in the book. It's the first story in the book, and it took place in a It was a very old building. It was actually a private members club, as it were. So it was a place where it was the old Conservative Club actually in Accrington, and it was, as I say, it was a private members club, and it was a place where people used to go to have a drink. There were a couple of snooker tables in there, full-size snooker tables, so people used to play snooker in there. And it was a building which had been built in around about 1890, and it was quite a magnificent old Gothic style building. It was built on 3 floors with quite an extensive cellar, basement to it, and just to give you some sort of idea about the layout of it, it had a bar on the first floor, a private members bar on the first floor. The second floor had 2 smaller bars in it, which the club used to hire out for private parties, so birthday parties, wedding receptions, that sort of thing. And then up on the 3rd floor was a ballroom. Now, this ballroom actually was quite famous across the whole of the north of England. It had what was a sprung floor, a sprung dance floor, and in fact, there was. Sorry?
Similar to Blackpool Tower.
I was just going to say the only other one in the whole of the north of England that I was aware of was the one at Blackpool Tower. So it was quite famous. Now, unfortunately, this building, I mean, this story that I'm going to tell you now goes back it goes back 30 years. Unfortunately, the building itself now is derelict, and it was the subject of arson about 5 or 6 years ago. Because unfortunately, after it had been the private members bar, it changed ownership, and it became a nightclub for a short while. And there was unfortunately a fatality in the mid-90s outside of this particular place, and they lost the license to sell alcohol, so it actually closed. So the building itself had been closed and empty for about 10 years before it succumbed to arson. And whilst I was writing the book, I don't actually live in Accrington anymore. I live probably, I think we're about 15 miles away now, something like that. And I don't actually go back to Accrington very often. It is the town that I was born in, and it's the town that I lived in for 40 years, first 40 years of my life. But when I went back to have a look at the building, I was quite shocked actually by the state of it. It literally is just a big pile of rubble now, and in fact there is a photograph of it in the book, and it's unfortunate. I was trying to find some photographs of the building in its heyday to put into the book, but the vast majority of photographs that I could find, especially of the ballroom, were all copyrighted. So unfortunately I've not been able to put any photographs in the book that show the building as it was. But if you go online and you use well-known search engines and look for images of the Accrington Conservative Club, it does bring up some photographs. So your listeners can go and have a look at the building in its heyday. Now,
was this building haunted?
Yes, very much so, and that's what I'm about to get to in a roundabout way. I worked there part-time whilst I was at college in my late teens, and there were 3 separate incidents over the space of about 2 years when I was working various nights behind the bar, serving drinks behind the bar.
Yeah.
The first one was when I saw the what I would describe as a shadow man, and at the time I hadn't heard the phrase. It wasn't a phrase that I was familiar with. This was the first experience of anything paranormal that I'd had, and as I say, I was about 18, 19 at the time.
That name only came round about 20 years ago, I think. Although
Well,
we've been seeing these things for over 100 years, I think the Shadow Man, the name itself, is not very old. So this is why you got the name for the book, The Shadow Man of Accrington, that can be bought on Amazon.com, by the way. Yes?
Yes, exactly. It was only when I started doing some research into... so it was only when I started doing some research into paranormal activity that I came across the name the Shadow Man, or the phenomena of the shadow people. And it was when I started thinking back about what had happened on this particular occasion that I sort of put the two and two together and thought, well, I think at the time what I saw was one of these shadow people. And what had happened was I was actually working down behind the bar on the first floor of the building, and it was a midweek, and it was very, very quiet. And in fact, it was getting to the end of the evening when we were about to shut the bar, and there was nobody else in the room apart from myself. And if you imagine that the bar itself was probably about 12 feet, 15 feet long, and standing with my back against the bar, on the left-hand side there was an opening into the room next door. So it was like a serving hatch, probably about 4 or 5 feet square, about waist height, and it actually opened up into the room where they had 3 full-size 12 by 6 foot snooker tables. So there was nobody else at all in the room. There was nobody in the snooker room. I was entirely on my own. The only other person that I knew was in the building was the steward of the club, and I knew that he was up on the 3rd floor in the ballroom, stocking the shelves behind the bar up there. And I noticed I was just stood there idly staring into space, just watching the clock ticking away to when I could close the bar and go home.
Yeah.
And I suddenly noticed out of the side of my eye that there was something moving in the serving hatch. And when I turned to have a look, it was a very tall, dark shape. Shaped like a man, but very tall and thin, and he seemed to be leaning forward, almost as if he was leaning forward through this hatch, leaning over the side of the bar and looking down behind the bar. And the one thing that I remember that was very very curious was that he seemed to be wearing a hat. And I could only describe it as a sort of either a top hat or a fedora or something similar to that. The figure itself didn't have any facial features. It didn't have any hands or anything like that. It was literally just the outline, but I could see the outline of the head, the shoulders, the arms, and it was quite substantial. It was a very, very very heavy, very thick mist almost, that was slightly opaque, but it was quite substantial. And this figure just was there for probably about, don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 seconds, something like that, which, when you're staring at something that you don't expect to see, is quite a long time. And then it just suddenly disappeared. And so I was stood there on my own. Obviously, at this point, I started to panic. I thought, oh my God, what is it? What have I just seen? What the flipping heck was that? Or words to that effect. And the first thing I did was there was an internal phone system in the building. So I grabbed the phone and I rang the top bar, knowing that the steward, a guy called Bernard, was up there. And I rang him, and he rang a few times, and he picked the phone up. And by this point, I was shaking, and my heartbeat had increased and everything else. And because I suddenly realised that I'd seen something quite scary.
Well, I think you're very brave, because most people would have legged it by then.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to even be there. Did it seem to be aware of you? Did you get that sense?
Possibly, yes. I mean, there was no interaction. It didn't seem to, as I said, it didn't have any facial features, but the way that it was stooping over the bar, it didn't seem to be looking at me. If it had a face, it didn't seem to be looking at me. It was almost like it was looking over the bar and searching for something on the floor. But I got the distinct impression that it was aware that I was there, but it didn't seem to bother it.
It's strange, you know, because all the reports that we get about, well, that are out there about the Shadow Man, is either wearing a fedora or he's wearing a top hat.
Yeah, it's difficult to sort. I couldn't quite decide thinking about it. I couldn't quite decide whether it was a top hat or a fedora. I think it was more a sort of fedora type hat, to be honest. It was a sort of squat hat. It wasn't particularly tall, so it wasn't your archetypal tall Victorian top hat, like a pipe hat as they used to call it. It was a lot shorter than that. But I grabbed the phone, rang up, and it rang a couple of times, and Bernard answered the phone, and I sort of blurted out, I think you need to get down here, something really strange has just happened, or words to that effect. So I put the phone down, and a couple of minutes later he came through into the bar. And he looked at me and he just said, you look like you've seen a ghost. And I said, well, it's strange you should say that. And he looked at me, and this guy was in his 60s. He was a very no-nonsense, very straight-talking Lancastrian. We say it as we see it. We say it as we think it around here. And he was very, very straight-faced, very, very honest, you know, no messing about with him. And he looked at me and he said, you look like you've seen a ghost. And I said, well, strangely enough, I think I just have. And he said, oh, you've seen him as well, have you?
Hey, that's why you said it. Oh,
so there's a history.
There was a history, and apparently this particular figure had been seen 3 or 4 times that he knew of by people who had worked in the club over the years and subsequently had left. A couple of them had left quite quickly after they'd seen this particular figure. The interesting thing is that my dad, who was alive at the time, he was actually quite active down at the club. He was part of the committee that they had that used to run the club, and it was a while after that I mentioned it to him. My dad had told me a couple of stories which I can come on to later, which were quite interesting. Again, my dad was very, very straight-faced, very honest, very straight down the middle, wouldn't make stories up, wouldn't tell tall tales. And I did mention this particular incident to him a few years later. And he said, oh yeah, I'd heard. He hadn't seen anything, but he knew of people who had frequented the club over the years or who had worked there, who had seen this figure in that area, that snooker room area, and he'd been seen, or I say this figure had been seen in different parts of the room. It was quite a large room, so he hadn't always been seen sort of at the serving hatch looking over the bar area, but he had been seen in other parts of that, but always in that room. He'd never been seen outside of that room. So it's an interesting phenomenon, and it's certainly one that stuck with me. And it's the first thing that I thought of really when I thought, I'm gonna start writing these stories down, because I think they're interesting. I think people need to know about them.
Yeah. What I find interesting, if this is something from another dimension or the future or something like that, why don't they change the fashion? Why don't they go with the fashion of the time or the area that they're in? Everybody ever sees is a fedora or a top hat. But what about the peaked cap?
Well.
You think they wear a peaked cap or something like that? Something that's a bit more fashionable.
Yeah, the the fashion thing is quite interesting. I don't know the answer to that, Irene, to be honest. I think it is interesting that this phenomena has been seen for a long time, as you said, over the course of many years, going back 100 years or so, and it's also been seen in different places in the world, not just not just industrial Lancashire, as it were. It's this phenomena has been seen all over the world, so it is strange that they do seem to have the same sort of fashion sense, as it were.
Did you ever uncover anything about the history of that building that might relate to this?
Well, the building it's interesting. The building was built in 1890, and it was built by a local industrialist, a guy by the name of Mr. Buller, Bullough, and Accrington for a long time was a town that had one major factory in it, and that was a factory called Howard and Buller, and they used to make cotton weaving machines. So the huge looms that they used to use during the Industrial Revolution to weave cotton. This particular factory used to make those. And in fact, my father worked there, my grandparents worked there, my uncle, auntie worked there over the years. So it was a big thing in the town. This particular building was built by, as I say, by this gentleman called Buller in about 1890. But other than that, there's no evidence to suggest that anything was there before this, because it was built. It wasn't built in the centre of the town. It was built just on the outskirts of the centre of the town, if you understand what I mean. So it was when the town was expanding in the late 19th century, and it was built on what were the outskirts of the town. So the area where it was built probably prior to that was most likely farmland, or just something where there wasn't many buildings.
I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of this phenomena, actually, whether they're time travelers or what. It's going to be very, very difficult to find out, because I honestly don't think they're spiritual. I don't think they're like ghosts at all. They're completely the opposite feeling.
Well, it's interesting because there were other things that happened in that building as well, one of them happened to... I'd heard people used to sort of make jokey comments about the building being haunted, and until I had this particular experience myself, I just used to shrug it off. You do as an 18-year-old lad, you just shrug it off and you think it's a big joke. It's not quite as big a joke when you see something like that. It does obviously sort of affect you, make you think about things in a different way, but there was definitely some poltergeist activity in that building as well, because there was another incident where it was actually a Saturday morning, so it was broad daylight, and I'd gone down to do a little bit of extra work in the club, just to stock the shelves behind the bars, that sort of thing, and I went up onto the third floor to where the ballroom was. And the ballroom always had a bit of a strange feeling about it. On one end you had the bar, quite a large bar, and then on the other end you had the area where they used to have live bands playing, but they were sort of like not bands with guitars and drums and keyboards and that sort of thing. They were more like your sort of old time bands, like how can I explain it?
Like what they had just after the war.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
exactly. Big bands. Yeah, swing bands. That sort of thing. And they used to have different bands on every Saturday night, and people used to go down there and they used to do all the dancing and everything else. But there was always a very strange feeling, especially where the area where the band was, because it was sort of like a raised area, and there was always I always felt there was a strange feeling up on that third floor. And this particular Saturday morning, I had gone up to stock the bar with bottles, various different things. And there was behind where the bar area was, there was like a small storeroom, and in the storeroom there was it was like a sort of dumbwaiter type lift, small lift, if you will. And I'd gone down to the cellar, put some crates of bottles in there, and sent the lift up to the third floor. Gone up to the third floor myself and walked through the ballroom, past the bar, and into the storeroom at the back. And as I went into the storeroom at the back, I heard from behind me this shattering, splintering of glass, but really loud, almost like it sounded. I thought at first that one of the windows had been broken. So I turned round and I walked into the bar area, and on the floor of the bar there was broken glass, and it was Irene will understand when I say this. I could tell that it was a pint glass, but it was one of the old type pint glasses with a handle. So do you know the ones I mean, Irene? The dimpled ones, the very heavy, old-fashioned pint glasses.
Yeah, like a mug shape.
Yeah, exactly. But they were very thick glass, very heavy, very substantial. From sort of like they used to drink out of them in the war and in the 1950s and the 1960s. Well, we had a stock of these glasses behind the bar because we still had people who used to come into the club who used to want to drink a pint of bitter out of an old-fashioned handled pint glass. And the way that we used to store them, underneath the front of the bar, there were, the best way to describe it, there were hooks that were screwed up into the ceiling of the bar. Underneath the bar there were these big metal hooks that were screwed up into the underside of the bar, and these barrel glasses, these handled glasses, were hung off. One was hung off each hook by the handle. Now these hooks were very substantial, and they were very deep. They were very curved, and they were very deep.
So it's not going to just slide off by itself.
It's not just going to fall off by itself. The only way that you could get one of these glasses off was to literally hold the glass, push it up over the hook, and then take it off the hook that way.
They had a roundness to the bottom of them, a bit like a meat hook, but
yeah, exactly.
Once you put it over the hook, it would sit in the dip of the hook.
Yeah, exactly. So there was no way it could just fall off or slip off. Now there was probably about 24 of these hung up behind the bar, and I looked up at this row of hooks, and there was one in the middle that was empty. So all the other glasses were still hanging there apart from this one in the middle. So the only way that incident could have happened is for somebody or something to have actually grabbed hold of the glass, lifted it up off the hook, and then thrown it with a fair amount of force on the ground to break it.
I was going to say, if it just fell from like waist height, would one of those things break on its own? No, it wouldn't, would it?
Not.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. No, and that was the first thing I thought of. And then looking back on it. First of all, there would have had to have been a real amount of force to break it, as you quite rightly said. But the bigger question to me was, well, if it was just one of those things that happened, if it just happened to fall off the hook, which it couldn't do because the hook was substantial enough for it not to be able to do that, but why would it do it at that particular time? Just when I walked into the bar area, why did it do it then? The only thing that I can think of is that there was some unseen hand had literally grabbed hold of this glass, pushed it up off the hook, and then really thrown it with some force very hard down on the floor in order to break it in such a fashion. I mean, the glass had spread right across behind the bar, a good sort of 12, 15 feet away from where I was stood.
I'm wondering even if a human being could do that. I mean,
I don't think they could.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, so that's a very interesting point, and thinking about it, probably not.
Even if you tried to replicate it with a glass like that, I don't know if a person. I mean, I don't know what kind of was it concrete? Was it concrete?
Very thick glass. It's floorboards more than likely, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
The vibration from your footfall on the floorboards would not have been able to get that glass off that hook.
No, it was like a sort of lino type carpeting behind the bar. So although there would be floorboards underneath it, in fact, the floor covering was probably quite springy.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking. So you couldn't even do that if you tried.
No, it was sort of like a really cheap sort of plastic rubbery type flooring that you just get behind a bar because it's easy to mop up if you spill spill a drink behind it or something like that. So no, it would have taken a huge amount of force in order to break it.
Yep. Right, so going on from the Conservative Club, and as soon as we're having a few problems with Skype, let's talk about Boggarts.
Okay.
Or bogies, or bugs, or wherever you are in England, they come under different names. Bobble, I think, is it Bobble in Scotland? Yeah, I think so. Bobble, or something like that. Boggarts. Can you tell us about Boggarts and what you found out about the Boggarts up in the Lancashire area?
Yeah, well, Boggarts is a strange name, and it's a sort of all-encompassing name, really. It's an old Lancashire name, although you're quite right, they are called various different things in different parts of the UK. But a boggart is a peculiar term used to describe any sort of malicious spirit or naughty spirit, or really now what people call poltergeists, and it was a subject that my granddad was particularly keen to talk, to tell me stories about. One of the stories that he used to tell was he lived in a little town called Church, which was near to Accrington, and it was where the Leeds-Liverpool Canal used to pass through, and used to get canal barges going up and down, all the time, bringing goods up and down from Liverpool up to Leeds. And one of the stories he used to tell me was there was a big canal bridge very close to where he lived, and in order to stop me from playing down there when I was a child, because the canal was quite dangerous. If you fell into the canal, invariably it was quite difficult to get out, and people used to drown in there. You used to get a lot of animals drowning in there, and the adults used to make a concerted effort to try and stop kids from playing down by the canal, in case there were accidents. And we used to love playing on this canal bridge because it was actually it was a swing bridge. So it was sort of cantilevered on one side of the canal. So when the canal boats came through, the pilots of the canal boats used to have to get off the boats, and they used to have to do all these manoeuvres with the bridge in order to swing it across, so the canal barges could get through. And so we used to love going down there as kids and playing around there and what have you. And my granddad used to tell me a story about this evil boggart that used to live underneath the bridge. And if we got too close to the bridge, this almost like this sort of troll type creature would come out from underneath the bridge and grab unsuspecting children and drag them down under the bridge into the canal and drown them and then eat them.
There's a bedtime story there.
So yeah, it was a bedtime story. But yeah, I mean, boggarts are they go back years. They go back hundreds and hundreds of years, and they were basically it was basically just a name that was given to any type of nasty or malicious spirit. Didn't necessarily have to be attached to a house or a property. They could be attached to a gate post. They could be attached to a pond or a stretch of river or a bridge. And in fact, quite close to where I live now, I live very close to Pendle Hill, but we've also got the River Ribble, which is quite a long river that flows down from the North Yorkshire Moor, goes through Lancashire and goes into the Irish Sea at Preston. And quite close to where I am here, there is a village called Sawley, Sawley, and there is the remains of an abbey, a Cistercian abbey there. It's just a big pile of bricks now, really, but it was attached to a much bigger abbey at a place called Whalley, which is a little bit further downstream. And there's a bridge there that goes over the river. It's a road bridge now, but it was originally a sort of horse and cart type, bridge that was built a few hundred years ago. And local legend is that there's a nasty old boggart lives underneath the bridge, and if you get too close to the edge of the water, it'll grab you and drag you in. So these stories are quite similar, sort of across the county. They don't necessarily just sort of refer to one particular place. It's sort of like a legend or a local folklore that's spread across the entire county.
Like I said, it's up and down England. You've got different names for it in different places. Some of them live in houses. Some of them live, like you say, near water. They could be anywhere. And I was telling Stephen this afternoon, I think, now I've always said since I've lived in this house that I've got something living under the stair, and I used to call it a goblin. Okay, under the stairs. Now the cupboard to our stairs, you can't open. You really have to force it open. It's absolutely terrible to try and get that open. You have to put two hands on it and really pull and pull and pull. But every now and then I'll go out there and it's open about an inch, and I joke that there is this little goblin, which I now call a boggart, sitting in there on my Hoover, peering at that little gap going on in the house, as you go past. So now every time I go past there, I kick the door and say, "Don't be nosy."
Well, it's interesting because there's I remember again when I was younger there was a story of a boggart that lived in a house in Accrington, and it was actually in the 1970s. It was this particular story actually made it into the local press because this house was a house that was owned by the local council. So the people that lived in there were tenants. They didn't actually own the house, and it became quite famous for having a poltergeist in this house, and it was quite a violent poltergeist as well. But a lot of the older people used to say that it was a boggart. That's what they used to call poltergeists. And in fact, this particular house, I believe, is still standing. and it still seems to have quite a high turnover, quite a high turnover of tenants, people living in the house that they don't, they move in, they last maybe 2 or 3 months, and then they move out again because the activity is so strong. But yeah, that's
where it's connected really with Poltergeist is because it acts the same way. It takes stuff.
Yeah.
Things move around. And in this house, this is happening all the time, literally all the time. Where forever things are moving from one place to another.
Irene, do your dogs pick up on things?
Yeah, occasionally, but they're pretty good. I don't think there's anything evil in here. I really don't. I wouldn't be surprised if I haven't got a boggart. And now I don't call him a goblin anymore because I've got this into my head. I love the word boggart.
Well, do you have a holly bush?
Yes, I got a holly tree and 2 holly bushes at the front. Hawthorn trees, because hawthorns were placed around the gardens in Wales and places like that in the olden days to keep witches out.
Well, in legend in Lancashire, the way to placate a boggart was to give it a saucer of milk and then banish it underground and plant a holly bush on top of it. And that was supposed to keep it under control. And in fact, there's a small town called Longridge, which is near to Preston. So it's probably about 10 mile away from here. And there's actually a stone slab on the side of the road. And it's known locally as the Written Stone, and it's dated 1655. And it actually says on it, it's carved on it, Rafe Radcliffe laid this stone to lie forever, AD 1655, and there is reputedly a boggart buried underneath it, and it was quite a malevolent entity that used to terrorise people who were travelling on the road along there by physically attacking them. And so the legend is that he actually laid it underneath this stone. So
they say about the house boggart and everything that it'll put its hand over your mouth when you're sleeping at night. It'll pull the covers off the bed. It'll pull your fingers. I have my toes pulled regularly because I'm one of these people that I have to have my feet out from under the covers, hanging over the side of the bed. And I'm not the only one who's had the toe puller in this house. My son has in his bedroom when he's here. And several people have had their toes pulled.
So it's mischievous, but it's not really vicious or anything.
No. I don't think it's vicious. I think if it is a boggart, it could turn vicious. But occasionally, you'll open a door and something black will move quickly across the floor and things like that. And that's another description of what they look like or can look like, a black blob and a blob.
That's right. Yeah.
They shape shift into your worst fears.
That's quite interesting. You should try and get it on camera.
I've got so many things happen in this house. Honestly, I can't believe it.
Have you done any investigation into the history of the house?
Yeah. I know the history. But
and is there anything that would suggest
no,
a malevolent entity?
No, the house was built by a young man for his new wife. They were deeply in love, and he built this house for her because she'd seen a replica of the house, or she'd seen a house in the north she fell in love with, and he didn't want to move. This is a quick one for everybody. He didn't want to move to the north of Wales. He bought a piece of land off of the farmer. This was back in 1800 and something, and he built a replica of the house she'd fallen in love with, and that's what this house is. So it's built on love. But she'd only been here in the house less than a couple of years. Her name was Annie, and she died of tuberculosis had a daughter that was 8 years old when she died. And so the daughter carried on living with the father, Herbert, and he died in the 1950s of old age. And the daughter, she never married. She died in the house as well. And Annie's seen in the house, Herbert's seen in the house, but he's always younger than that stage in his life where he died. When I see him, he's a young man, you know. And I know it's them because I've seen them, and there's an old black and white photograph that is in the house when we moved in that has to stay in the house, and it's them in the photograph. You know, so there's nothing evil about the house whatsoever, but that doesn't mean to say that it's not going to attract something in, you know. This is a village live in, so Boggarts, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't have a Boggart. It's better than a goblin, I suppose.
Well, it could be worse because there's just one last one on Boggarts, if you don't mind me just mentioning this one. There's one which is famous in the city of Preston, which again is in Lancashire, and it's a headless black dog that apparently is seen at times of when something particularly unpleasant is going to happen to somebody. They see this huge headless black dog. They also hear it howling as well, which is given the fact it's not got any head, is quite a feat in itself. But yeah, it's sorry.
It's a harbinger of doom.
It is, and it's often apparently accompanied by the rattling of chains as well. So it's quite a horrendous thing, really. It's all your worst fears all rolled into one.
Because there's a lot of folklore up there about shucks and things like that, isn't there?
There is. That's another word for these spectral hounds. These huge, the other names for them are trash or striker or striker. There are quite a few different names. It's not a subject that I've gone into in too much detail in the book, but it is mentioned a couple of times. But there are lots and lots of local legends. I could probably fill a book just on spectral hounds and spectral cats. And in fact, believe it or not, there's actually a spectral rabbit in Rochdale, of all places, which has attached itself to a church in Rochdale, and it used to terrorise churchgoers. So can you imagine being terrorised by a ghostly rabbit? Then
a little bunny rabbit.
Go to Rochdale.
But these things, folklore in England, we've all basically got it up and down England and Scotland, well, these islands. We've got all the same sort of creatures, but we all just call them something different. You know, just got different names. That's about basically it, isn't it? But there is so much folklore in the islands. It's unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
So you love it, Stephen.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking is how all that stuff transferred over to New England, because we have all of that sort of thing here as well.
You've got those little people, what they called out there? Oh.
Well, I don't know, fairies, elves.
Yeah. Yeah, but we got fairies and elves well, it's all over Europe, really. They're all around the world, aren't they?
Pretty much, yeah. I think the American Indians have their own.
Yeah, so that's the Boggarts. So what about ghosts? How have you other ghosts?
Well, yeah, lots of very interesting stories in the book. I'll tell you about a farmhouse that. No, say it again. Just let it calm down. I'll tell you about a farmhouse that my wife used to live at before she met me. and she lived there with her family, her mum, stepdad, sister, and brother. And it was called Boonkirk Farm, and it's up on the Pennine Moors, going down towards Manchester and Bolton. It's in a place called Rising Bridge, which is very high up. It's very windswept. It's, if you imagine, it's moorland. It's very bleak, and in the middle of this was this 16th century farmhouse, and it was actually one of the oldest farmhouses in Lancashire, one of the earliest ones, built in about the mid 1500s. And when Sarah's mum bought the farmhouse, it was quite run down, quite dilapidated, and she started to run a dog kennel and cattery business from there. But they had their own resident ghost, and this particular ghost was quite used to enjoy making a lot of noise. Used to enjoy stomping about throughout the farmhouse, especially, as you can imagine, in the middle of the night. And an interesting story that she told me was that they used to be woken up in the middle of the night by really heavy footfalls on the first floor landing where the bedrooms were. But she said it always sounded like very heavy boots or clogs with sort of metal inserts hitting stone. So if you can imagine that noise that a hammer would, say, for instance, make if you hit a So if you could imagine the sound of a hammer hitting a block of stone, for instance, it's that clanging noise. And they used to hear this noise in the middle of the night, and it was quite clearly footfalls and somebody or some entity stomping up and down the first floor landing outside the bedroom doors. But the interesting thing was that there were wooden floorboards on the first floor, so they could never quite work out where this noise was coming from. And it was only after they'd lived there for a few years that they started taking some of the floorboards up on the first floor to discover that there were actually stone slabs underneath the floorboards. So whatever this entity was, this noise was obviously being made on the old stone slabs that were underneath the wooden floorboards.
Yeah, I can hear a banging noise in the background here. I don't know what this is. Is that you,
I'm
Stephen?
not hearing it, or making it.
Hear it?
Yeah, I can hear it. Yeah.
That's that Boggart again.
Yeah, it probably is.
I do apologise for the sound quality tonight, but it's beyond their expertise to solve it, I'm afraid.
I think it's the Lancashire ghosts that are getting involved, to be honest. But yeah, there was another interesting story that Sarah's grandfather told me. He passed away about 3 or 4 years ago now. He was well into his 70s. Well into his 90s, and he was a very interesting chap. And he had a really quite interesting experience when he was staying over at the farm. He'd been doing some odd jobs around the farm, and he decided to retire to the living room, the lounge area, and he poured himself a glass of whiskey. So it was like, again, a very heavy tumbler glass, very almost like crystal glass, very heavy bottomed tumbler glass.
Glasses are, aren't they?
Yeah, and yeah, that's right. And he'd poured himself. Doing it again. So So he poured himself this glass of whiskey, and there was a wooden sideboard in the room, at one end of the room, and he put this glass on the sideboard, and he walked across the room and went to turn the TV on. And as he turned round, he said he saw this glass raising off the sideboard and float very slowly across the room.
Whiskey in it.
With the whiskey still in it, and which is a waste of whiskey, obviously, because it dropped to the floor, and the whiskey went everywhere. And he said he just stood there and was absolutely amazed by what he'd just seen.
So there's no normal explanation for that unless there was a string on top of it. I mean, there's nowhere to go with that. Yeah.
Absolutely not. No, he told me the story several times. The story never changed. I have absolutely no reason not to believe that what he told me actually happened, and he actually saw this.
So was the ghost trying to tell him something about drinking? You think? Was it?
Well, I think it was because he'd poured a glass of Sarah's stepdad's 17-year-old Balvenie.
That would do it.
So yeah, that was an interesting place. Yeah.
So all these stories that you're telling us now, they're all in your book, The Shadow Man of Acton, which again I say is available on all the Amazons.
Yeah, they are. If you just put my name into Amazon, Craig Bryant, Bryant, it will come up.
Now, what about the ghost boy with no legs?
No, yeah, this is an interesting one. This is a lady who contacted me through a mutual friend. She found out that I was looking for stories to put into a book. She lives in a house near to Preston, in a place called Walton Dale. And she moved into this house. This is it's quite an old property. It was built, she thinks, around about the 19th century, so early to mid 1800s, she said. And shortly after she'd moved in, there was just herself and her young daughter, who was about 2 at the time. And shortly after they moved in, she became aware that she felt that there was something else in the house, or somebody else in the house with her. And it didn't take long before her daughter started talking about a little boy that she used to play with. And interestingly, one of this lady's friends, who was quite psychic, went round to the house. The first time she went round to the house, she said, "You've actually got a little boy living here, and he's disabled." Now, that's interesting in itself, because probably about 6 months later, the lady who I'm talking about is called Helen. She said that her daughter suddenly said to her one day, "Why has the little boy in this house not got any legs?" And apparently she used to see this little boy it was like an outhouse built onto the side of the house, where she used to keep a washing machine and a fridge freezer and everything else, like a sort of utility room, as we call them. But her daughter used to see this little boy stood there, but she could only see him from his knees upwards, and so it was almost like he was stood on the level of the ground, which was lower than the current level, if you understand what I mean. So the floor had been built up by maybe a foot over the years, and he was stood on the original level of the floor, so she could only see him from the knees upwards. But he used to like singing to them, and in fact he still does. I actually spoke to her quite recently just to try and get an update on whether she'd had any further experiences in the sort of last 9 months or so since I spoke to her, and he apparently likes to hum and sing, and if Helen and her daughter are ever just sat there, humming away or singing a song or anything like that, he joins in. They can hear the audible phenomena, as it were, of his voice and him singing or humming along to whatever tune they're humming along to. So, her daughter describes him as wearing sort of quite old-looking clothes, and the way that she's described what he is wearing would seem to suggest it's sort of mid-Victorian era clothing, sort of 1850s, 1860s. So probably around about the time that the property was built. And it used to be
built on something else.
There used to be some stables next door to it, apparently. So he could well have been a stable boy.
So he's actually learning new tunes. It's not just a recording of, a replay of something that happened in the 19th century.
No, he's definitely interacting with them. She said he definitely sings along. So I'm trying to arrange actually to go down and spend a bit of time down there and see whether any of these whether this phenomena actually manifests itself.
See if you can record it.
Yeah, I'm going to try and get it on try and get a recording of it or some video of with audio to see whether we can pick it up on that, because she said it happens on a regular basis. It's not.
Now here's a question. If you go there and you get another voice, that's in the recording, that's pretty strong. And then maybe if you got a shot of something that looks like it might be a boy, but let's suppose that you've got the holy grail of the thing. You've got a video of the boy standing there at his knees and he's singing. Nobody would believe that because it was too good, you think?
It would certainly be. I think skeptics will probably try and find a way of explaining it away.
It's possible to get evidence that's so good that it's no good.
It's definitely possible to get evidence which is too good. Yeah, because I think we used to. I mean, you go on YouTube, for instance. There are all these channels on there now of ghost hunters and people, trying to get evidence of ghosts and everything else. And from what I've seen, most of the evidence is quite flimsy, to put it mildly. A lot of these TV programs and YouTube channels, I think, are there more for entertainment purposes rather than actual proper investigations and the evidence to common. So it's doing it.
It's also so easy to fake stuff. All the apps and things that we've got,
So how do you establish credibility then? Let's say you go over there and you do get something that's amazing. How do you set it up in such a way that it's believable?
That's a very good question. I think until you get evidence like that, until you actually get evidence which is that strong, I suppose it's difficult really to say how you would then try and convince people that it was genuine. I suppose the only thing you can do is say to people, look, what I'm going to show you now is genuine, or what you're going to hear now on this recording is genuine, and I have not faked it, and I can't explain it. This is genuine paranormal.
Well, one of the things people have done is to bring in an independent observer, who can testify that, I saw this.
Yeah, you never know when this sort of thing's going to happen. But the point is, it doesn't matter how good the evidence is, you're always going to get those people that are going to be saying, oh, it's faked. It's fake.
Yeah, and the thing as well with a lot of these mediums, I mean, I mentioned this actually in the book, because I went to see a medium myself. My mum went to see a medium shortly after my dad passed away, and I think it's very difficult to prove sometimes that these people are genuine. And I think if you're going to have an independent observer in there when you're doing these sort of investigations, you have to make sure that they are genuine, and that they are credible. Otherwise, it doesn't do your credibility any good. I think. If you're trying to,
it won't help to have a professional skeptic.
Yeah, the only other thing to do is send it off to the farm. Say it was Kodak. Send it to Kodak. Have them check it out.
Yeah.
Even then, they're not gonna. They're just gonna come back and say, "Well, we can't answer this." You're always going to get those skeptics that are going to turn around and say, no, you haven't got anything there, it's faked. Even if you had an independent observer, they say, oh, he's lying. So, really, it is the Holy Grail. Everybody wants that photograph of doing ghosts. But, it's just one of those things, it's just not going to... You're always going to come up against a brick wall.
Until it actually happens to you, and then that's if your whiskey gets spilled on the floor, that's a little different.
Yeah, I will be very upset in my whiskey.
Especially if it's really old whiskey.
Well, exactly. If it's a good single malt, yeah. But, if something like that did happen and I did witness it, then I think it's probably worth it. But, having seen what I've seen over the years and having spoken to people who've, been very, very credible with things that they've told me, I am a firm believer that there are things out there that we don't understand, and there are things out there that I've seen that I don't understand. And so, to get evidence that's so strong, I think it will be great. I think it will be brilliant. But
just like, it would be, you'd be made if you could get that photograph.
I'd be an absolute millionaire. Don't worry, I'd sell it to the highest.
So how do you find people, and how do you establish their credibility when you're looking around to try to find people to interview and use their stories? How do you do that?
Well, people have approached me. It's been quite interesting, really, that it doesn't take much for somebody to open up, to say, well, I've had this experience, or I've lived in this house that I think was haunted, and this happened and that happened, and so on. And I think you can just tell when you speak to somebody who is genuine, who is telling you something that shall we say, they genuinely believe, rather than them just spinning you a yarn, telling you a story, making it up as they go along. I like to think I'm quite a good judge of character, and everybody that I've spoken to, the third-hand stories that are in the book are from people that I genuinely believe were telling me, true stories, things that had happened to them. So yeah, I think it's all about being able to judge whether somebody is actually telling you the truth.
Are there more people out there that have had experiences, have you found, than what you would think?
Yes, there are, actually. As I say, the one about the little boy that we've just discussed, that was just a completely off-the-cuff conversation that I had with somebody who I'd literally met about 5 minutes earlier. I was introduced to her by a mutual friend, and she said, I've got to tell you about this story. If you're writing a book, I've got to tell you about this story. There was a guy who works in a school, in a place called Darwin near Blackburn, which again I think is a fascinating story, and this is something that it's an investigation that I am trying to continue with. I've already been to this school, I've already been shown around the school, I've already spoken to this particular guy who worked there as a caretaker, and again he approached me through a mutual friend. He found out that I was writing this book, and he said, I've got to tell you about what's happening in this school. The phenomena that we have going on all the time in the school is quite amazing. And again, almost immediately when I met him and when he started talking to me and telling me about the things that had been going on at this school, I formed the opinion that he was genuine, and I could just tell by the way that he was and the way that he was talking to me and telling me these stories that I decided straight off that he was being genuine with me.
Sounds like they're grateful to talk to you. Excuse me.
I mean, some. Oh dear. Okay.
Working on this Skype. What does it say? Without naming the school, can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, is this, because it's most people sort of associate hauntings with very old buildings, for instance, old stately homes or castles or that sort of thing. But this particular school has only been built. It was built about 10 years ago, and at the time there was quite a hoo-ha, shall we say, in the local community about where this school was built, because in order to build it they had to demolish a lot of what were mill workers' houses, so the old 2 up 2 down terraced houses that are quite common in this part of the country, and also and this is the interesting thing, they demolished a church, and they also had to dig the graveyard up, and they had to exhume quite a number of bodies and move those exhumed bodies to other graveyards. Now, I did some research on this shortly after speaking to this gentleman who worked at the school, a guy by the name of Stuart, and I managed to find a map from the turn of the last century, so around about 1900. And when I overlaid a modern map over the top of it, I could quite clearly see which areas had been demolished. I could see where the church had been prior to it being demolished, and I could also see where the graveyard, the cemetery, had been prior to it being covered over by a car park attached to the school. So there was some credibility there with what he told me about what had been in that area previously. And the interesting thing about the church is that there's actually 3 distinct ghosts that have been seen in the school. Now, these ghosts have been seen not only by pupils at the school, they've been seen by various members of staff, teaching staff, support staff, maintenance workers who've been in there, and so on. The 3 are there's a little boy who they've nicknamed Casper, and he likes to go up to the school is actually built on 3 floors, and on the 3rd floor there is a music room, and in the music room there are various musical instruments, one of which is a set of drums. Now, apparently Casper likes to play the drums, and he's quite good, and he's been heard on numerous occasions, usually when the school is empty at night by the security staff. They can hear the drums being played. They go up to the music room, and there's nobody there. They can't find anybody at all. And he's actually been photographed, and unfortunately I've still not been able to track down this photograph, but apparently what happened was there was 2 of the pupils, two girls pupils at the school, had actually taken a selfie of themselves in the toilets on the 3rd floor next to where the music room is situated. And when they looked back at the photograph, there was the 2 girls, and in between them there was a little boy, again dressed in how they described it as being sort of Victorian looking clothing, so flat cap and sort of like little jacket and all that sort of thing. And this photograph was actually passed on to one of the teachers who works at the school, but unfortunately she's left, And when I was talking to Stuart, I asked Stuart if he'd been in contact with her, if he could get hold of the photograph, and he said no, he had no idea where she'd moved on to. So that's unfortunate, because that would have been a fantastic piece of evidence to look at. So there's Casper. There is another shadow man type entity, which apparently is seen quite a lot from the outside of the school. So he's seen looking out of the window. So people on the outside of the school looking at the school can see him and see this shadow on the inside looking out of the window. And he's also seen up on the 3rd floor as well. He's been seen by numerous members of staff. He's been seen by quite a few of the pupils. And also Stuart's own daughter as well had seen this figure. And there was one particular incident where he said there was only him and his daughter in the school. He was actually locking up at the end of the day, and his daughter had gone up onto the 3rd floor to the music room because she was learning the piano, and she wanted to go up and play on the piano that was up there. And basically what had happened, he was in another part of the school locking the doors and everything else, securing the place, and he said his mobile phone rang and it was his daughter, and his daughter was in her mid-teens. He said she was about 14, 15 at the time. And what had happened was she was up in the music room playing the piano, and she said she saw a shadow going past the window, and it stopped outside the door to the schoolroom, to the music room, and it started trying to open the door with the handle. She said she could see the handle moving up and down, but luckily the door was actually locked from the inside. There were 2 ways into the music room, and she'd come in through one door, and this, whatever it was, this shadow man, shall we call him, was trying to open the other door, which happened to be locked from the inside. And she said that the handle went. She said that the handle went up and down about 3 or 4 times, and then she saw the shadow move away. And at this point, she took a mobile phone out and rang her dad and said, she initially thought that it was actually her dad messing about. But Stuart said he was on the other side of the school, and of course he ran as fast as he could from one side of the school to the other. And he said his daughter was visibly shaken. She was absolutely terrified about what she'd seen, and from that day on, she refused to go to the school with him. She attended a different school. She didn't actually go to that school, but she refused to go to the school with him. So it obviously frightened her quite badly.
I remember you talking about sitting with your grandparents telling stories. I remember in Scotland, my grandfather would sit all us children around and tell us ghost stories. And he was telling us a story about an old church. Now, the strange thing about this church, all the pews were in a circle, but it was to be demolished. Telling us the story, he would also mention that it was about to be demolished, but he was telling us a story about back in the Victorian times, or in the Victorian times, how they'd seen there was a wall around the churchyard, but iron gates. How people crowded around the iron gates to watch what they thought was a ghost running around in between the tombstones and everything, and saying, no, it wasn't a ghost, it was somebody with a sheet or something over there. And pickpockets were working the crowd there.
Yeah.
But he also said that it was being demolished that week, and my mother started talking about it to him, and I heard my grandfather say that under British law, under Scottish law, the last person that was buried in the churchyard had to be there for 100 years before they could demolish the churchyard, so that no living soul that knew that person would be left alive.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've not heard that one before.
Yeah. So I was just wondering whether this was an old churchyard, hadn't been used, it was ready to be demolished because the last one had been buried over 100 years previous.
Yeah, could have been. Yeah.
You talked about the church being demolished, just brought that back to me.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about the church, the other ghost that is seen more often than the other two, is I've nicknamed her the Wailing Lady, and she is seen not only at night, but she's also seen during the day. She's been seen by numerous members of staff and by numerous pupils who go to the school, and she is seen in the canteen area of the school, and she actually glides through the canteen area. She's dressed in black. She's got a cowl over her head, so they can't see her face, and she screams and she wails and she cries, and she throws her arms up in the air as she's going through the canteen area. She obviously in life was absolutely racked with grief. The way that she's going down through from one end of the school to the other, when I had a look on the old map, it seems to be that she's following a road that used to be there before the school was built, and the way that she is travelling is down towards where the old graveyard was and where the church was. So from the stories that I've been told about this particular spirit, this particular ghost, it sounds very much like she's a recording. She doesn't seem to interact with anybody. Although apparently there was one lunchtime where she absolutely. Let's give it a sec. There we go. There was one particular lunchtime where she absolutely frightened one of the kitchen staff to death, because this lady, this kitchen staff lady, was carrying a tray of food out of the kitchen area into the canteen part of the school, and she actually came, I would say face to face, but she apparently said that the ghost didn't have a face, so it was face to cowl, if you like, literally, so close to this entity, that she just screamed at the top of her head, top of her voice, threw the tray up into the air and ran. And ran out of the school and refused to go back working there ever again. So yeah, she's the wailing woman has been seen quite a lot, and she's heard throughout the school, especially late on in the evening. Apparently, when this gentleman Stuart was telling me that they go around and they're locking the school up and everything, he said there's been two or three of them walking around the school as a group, and they've heard this wailing and this screaming coming from down in the canteen area. And he said there was one particular time where they could hear this screaming, this crying, and all three of them went down into the canteen to see if they could see her, in effect. But he said as they were walking down through the canteen, he said there was an object came whizzing past the head, as he put it, and bounced on the floor in front of them. And when he went to have a look at it, it was an old, very early decimalised, so early 1970s penny. So it wasn't a pre-decimalisation penny. It wasn't sort of like a Victorian coin. It was sort of early 1970s. But he said this coin had been thrown by somebody or something in their direction. There was only him and the other two people that were with him who witnessed this, that were actually in the school. He knew that for a fact. And when he bent down to pick this penny up, he said he touched it, and he said it burnt his skin. He said it was absolutely red hot, and he literally had to leave it just sat on the floor for about 10-15 minutes before it cooled down enough for him to be able to pick it up and look at it. And it was at that point that he realised it was a very early decimalised 1 penny piece. So that was interesting. And he also told me of another time as well where he was sat in the staff room after they'd been round and done the rounds and locked everything up and everything. And there was himself and these other two security guards that worked there with him. And he said he was sat just having a cup of tea, and all of a sudden he said he felt as if there were two cold hands, one on each shoulder. And he said he went absolutely freezing cold. He said he felt so chilled to the bone. And one of the other guys that was in the room looked at him, and then he said he'd gone absolutely ashen white. And he touched him, and he said he felt like a block of ice. And he said this sensation lasted for about 5 minutes and then stopped almost as quickly as it had come on. He said, but he felt so absolutely freezing cold. But he felt like something was gripping his shoulders, and he couldn't shake it loose. And he said it was a very, very frightening experience.
I should imagine it would be. You know, it's bad enough when you walk into a room and suddenly that room goes icy cold. Let alone be touched by cold, you know, and feel that actual touch, that coldness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've had an experience where I've gone into a room where it has been absolutely icy cold, and in fact, it was a shop that I used to work at many years ago, and this was when I was probably, again, we're going back a number of years now, but I was in my early 20s, and this happened after the experience I'd had at the Conservative Club, or the experiences that I'd had. And I was working in a shop in a town called Oldham, which is near Manchester, northeast side of Manchester. And it was, we still have the electrical chain. It's still going now. If I can mention the name, it was Curry's, the electrical store, and this particular shop that was in Oldham.
Sorry, you have to say sell extended warranty.
Yeah, other electrical stores are available. Yeah, it was. I mean, most of them now are sort of on, out of town retail parks, but 30 years ago they tended to be high street stores, and this particular branch was in what was obviously a very old building, right in the centre of Oldham, and it was a 3-story building, and the top floor, the top storeroom area was particularly unpleasant. And I remember the first time I went in there, and there's an interesting story attached to this. The first time I went in there on my own, it was like walking into a freezer. It was absolutely freezing cold, and it was a real
icy cold, isn't it? Very icy cold.
Very icy cold. I could actually see my breath, so it was like, being outside on a cold frosty day or a cold frosty evening. I could actually see my own breath, and I do remember that it was actually the middle of summer at the time, so it was a real temperature drop walking into this room, and I felt really uncomfortable. I felt as if there was a really dark presence in this room. And it was only afterwards, by talking to one of the ladies who worked in the shop. I didn't actually say anything at the time. It was a few weeks later. And I actually mentioned it to this lady, and I said, I don't like going up onto the third floor stockroom. There's something not right about it. It doesn't feel right. And she said, "Oh, why? What have you seen?" And I said, "Well, I haven't seen anything. I've just felt, it's really cold and it's really oppressive and really unpleasant and everything else." And she said, "Oh, well, you're lucky you haven't seen the man swinging from the roof with a noose around his neck." And I said, exactly, that's what I said. I said, what? And apparently there'd been a few staff over the years had seen this apparition of a man hanging from the ceiling with a rope round his neck. So thankfully I didn't see
so
it.
So the moral of this story is if you apply for a job and a lot of people have left, check out.
You have to find out why people leave. Absolutely, yeah. You need to find out why people have left. I mean, the interesting thing about that was this lady, when she was telling me, she was quite matter of fact about it. I think she was obviously of a similar sort of mind or a similar opinion about these sort of things that we are. But again, at the time I was quite young. I was only in my early 20s, and I think you sort of reevaluate these things as you get older. And it was one of the things that I started thinking about. One of the experiences that I started thinking about again when I decided I wanted to write the book, because it was quite a startling experience. It's a feeling that I can still remember how I felt. I can still feel that feeling of dread and that icy coldness that sort of almost seemed to envelop me as I walked into the room. It was very, very peculiar.
My bed actually goes like that every now and then. I wake up with the icy coldness in the room. It's absolutely freezing, even in the summer. But I don't take any notice of it. I just tell it to bug off. I'm so used to it all. It doesn't worry me. Nothing seems to worry me.
Now, Craig, have some of the people you've talked to made particular efforts to get rid of these things, or have anybody gone proactive with this stuff?
There's another lady who contacted me. I reached out on social media. There are some local social media groups for the Lancashire area on Facebook and Twitter and so on. And I actually put a message on one of the Facebook groups, one of the paranormal groups for Lancashire, just to say that I was trying to get some stories together, and if anybody local wanted to speak to me. And I received an email from a lady who lived in a house that was quite. She bought this particular house and she was renovating it to live in with a family, and very shortly after she moved into this particular house, they realised that there was quite a lot of paranormal activity going on in there. And she said that things got so bad that she found a lady who lived locally who said that she was a medium. And apparently this lady went to the house, this medium, told her a few things about what was going on in the house and what was causing it and everything else. But apparently after she'd been in and done her reading, as it were, it made things twice as bad.
It made it mad, huh?
It seemed to intensify the activity quite a lot, yeah. And it's an interesting one, that, because it's there was quite a lot of paranormal activity. There was her young son said that there were two girls who lived in the house who died in a fire in the house, and the lady who contacted me was called Susan, and Susan said that they could often smell burning in the house, and when they first moved in, they were obviously, you immediately panic when you smell burning, but they got so used to it because they could smell it all the time. But apparently these two girls, one was aged 11 and one was aged 9. They were called Christy and Helena, according to Susan's son, who he used to play with them, but they said that they died in a fire in the house. She also said that there were other entities in the house as well. One was quite violent. It picked a knife up and threw a knife across the kitchen, which narrowly missed her husband. And there was another occasion where they used to hear, when they were downstairs, they used to hear on the first floor, footsteps and something or somebody running about upstairs. And apparently one evening it got so loud that her husband went upstairs to see what was going on. And he tried to open the door into the son's bedroom. The son wasn't in the bedroom at the time, but he tried to open the door into the son's bedroom, and he couldn't. There was something pushing back, and he managed to open it, and it pushed back so strongly against him that when it closed, slammed shut, it actually split the door from the top right down to the bottom, right down the middle. So, that's obviously there's an awful lot of force goes into breaking a door like that. I've slammed doors in my time, but I've never broken one, never split a door down the middle. So there was obviously some force involved.
Sort of similar to that glass. Apparently, it's possible that they can put a lot of force behind these things.
Exactly. Yeah. It's it's almost like there's some sort of malevolence, or there's some sort of anger involved, and it's the way that whatever these things are, whatever the entity is, the only way it can show its anger is by physically breaking something. So
that's kind of a common theme, strong emotion, like with the wailing woman and this guy, that gives them extra power or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely emotion involved. I think emotion is the overriding factor with a lot of these phenomena, or certainly quite a lot of the ones that I've spoken to people about or I've investigated. There does seem to be quite strong emotion attached to them in one way or another, whether it's grief or whether it's anger, and that, the really strong emotion,
and that makes it more likely that they're going to manifest physically, apparently. Yeah,
I think so. I think you're right.
Okay, right now the coal mines are up and down, especially around this place in Wales, and we have the Tommyknockers obviously in Cornwall and places like that down in the mines, but you also wrote a story on the ghosts of a coal mine disaster.
Yeah, well, that's actually linked into the one that I was just talking about, because it turned out this particular lady, Susan, after she'd had this medium who'd come in. So Susan had, when she'd had the medium into the house, the medium had said that there were quite a number of spirits that were in this particular house, and she did some research into what had happened in the past in that area, and what she found was that underneath the area where her house and the other houses in that area were built, there were some abandoned mine shafts. There'd been a lot of coal mining in the area, going right back to the early 19th century. Late 1800s, there was a disaster, a mining disaster. There was these mine shafts were attached to the Moorfield Colliery, which was located about half a mile away from where Susan lived. And what had happened briefly was there'd been an accident. there'd been a build-up of gas, and there'd been an explosion, and there'd been around about a dozen miners had been trapped down in the mine shafts, and had died. And at the inquest, which was carried out 2 or 3 days after the disaster, it came to light that the supervisor at the pit's head had refused to bring the lift cage up with some of the miners inside. But we never found out why. The inquest never found out why. But this particular gentleman refused to bring the miners out, and there was a second explosion shortly afterwards, which subsequently injured him and others that were situated at the head of the pit. And he managed to cling on to life for about 3 or 4 days before he died, and apparently he was absolutely racked with guilt in his final hours, because he was aware that he caused the death of all these miners. I mean, some of them, there were some young boys down there that were as young as sort of 10, 11, 12 years of age. And it turns out that the house that he lived in and the house that he subsequently died in from his injuries was the house that Susan was living in. And these spirits that were attached to the house were actually the spirits of some of the miners who had lost their lives and had refused to move on because they blamed this particular supervisor for their deaths, and they couldn't move on because they blamed him for the untimely demise, as it were. So yeah, that's an interesting one.
I've got a mining story here in Wales. It's not far from here where it actually happened. There was this boxer called Billy who worked in the mines. And he was quite a good boxer. He went all over the place boxing and one thing or another. But he used to train on top of the hill. And he used to run across the hill every day, or a couple of times a day, doing his training for the boxing. But he also worked in the mine. And he was down there one day with his son, and there was something went wrong, and there was a cave-in or something, and he threw himself on top of his son to save his son's life. But he can still be seen running over the hill even today, doing his training for the boxing. I can't remember his other name, but I know his name is Billy something. Yeah, that's a mine disaster, that one.
Do you know the name of the mine?
No, I don't, but it's down near Neath or Port Talbot, down that way.
Because, of course, it's absolutely crisscrossed, isn't it, with mines down in that area.
Yeah. Yeah, because when we bought this house, we had to have it checked out for mines underground and one thing or another.
Yeah, the old mine shafts, yeah.
Just sure, because we weren't going to buy it if there was mine shafts down there.
Well, no, there are certain areas around here where houses are subsiding because they're discovering mine shafts underneath areas of well, certainly. I mean, this particular one was just outside Accrington, the whole area around there was just absolutely crisscrossed with mine shafts, because there's a huge coal seam in this area. So over the years they just used to dig deeper and deeper and deeper to get to the coal, because it was a highly industrialized area during the Industrial Revolution. So they're still discovering mine shafts now, 100 years later, 150 years later, that they didn't even know existed.
Yeah. I can believe it. I can believe it. Right, so what else have we got? Have we got any other stories? Wood Terrace.
Wood Terrace, yeah. Wood Terrace. This is quite a personal one. It was a house that Sarah, my wife, lived in when I first met her.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after I moved in, to live in the house with her, I became aware that there was something else. There was another entity, if you like, living in the house, or certainly in the house with us. And there was one particular quite interesting experience that I had, and it was shortly after our son was born. And when he was a very small baby, he used to sleep in a cot in our bedroom, same bedroom as us. Just really, just to keep him close by, and so that we could give him a feed in the middle of the night and everything else, as newborn babies are.
Yeah.
And this particular incident happened. I woke up in the middle of the night. I wasn't woken up by James at all. He was asleep. But I happened to just wake up, and I remember sitting up in bed, and I looked at his cot, and there was a figure stood by his cot. And it was the figure of a lady, quite an elderly lady, I remember. And she was leaning forward, looking down into the cot. And the first thing that I noticed about her was that she was smiling. And strangely, I didn't feel any panic or any, I didn't feel as if there was anything wrong. I wasn't surprised. I didn't feel any surprise or any panic or any fear or anything like that. I just felt that whoever this lady was, she was looking down at basically my newborn son, and had nothing but love and affection for him, and was smiling at him, and then she sort of faded away, and I led back down again, rolled over, and went back to sleep. and it was only when I woke up in the morning that I suddenly thought, oh my word, what, was I dreaming? Was I imagining it? And to this day, I don't think I was. I think I genuinely believe that I was awake, and I genuinely believe that I saw this figure stood over the cot looking down at James.
Do you think that it could have been a ghost from the house, or do you think it could have been a departed relative from long ago? Or
well, Sarah seems to think that it was a departed relative. I think it possibly have been one of the ladies who used to live in the house before we moved in. We actually mentioned it to one of our neighbours. The lady who lived next door was an elderly lady, and she'd lived in her house ever since she'd been a little girl. And she told us that in the 1930s she had two aunties, two spinster aunts, who actually lived in that house in Wood Terrace, and she showed us. She showed us a photograph of these two ladies. Now, it will be easy for me to say that I immediately recognised one of them as this lady that was looking over his cot. I didn't, because, you know, I didn't get that good a look at this figure. It was quite see-through, it was quite opaque, but it was definitely the outline of a... It was definitely the outline of an elderly lady, and I could definitely see the facial features that she was smiling, but I didn't get to see the facial features enough to be able to recognise her from a photograph from the 1930s. But I'm fairly convinced that it was one of these two spinsters that had lived in the house. And in fact, they're both buried in the same grave in the churchyard of the church in the village. And when we've been told this story about these two elderly ladies living in the house, Sarah decided that she was going to go up to the graveyard, find the grave, and introduce herself, which she did, just to say hi and. We're now living in your house, you know. Yeah. But there was nothing ever malevolent about it at all. And in fact, another interesting thing happened when we decided to sell the house. We were moving out. We'd sold the house. It's actually my mum decided that she was going to buy the house. She sold her house in Accrington and bought Wood Terrace off us because she wanted to move into the village to be closer to us. And there's one particular afternoon, I'd taken some time off work to do some packing, and I was in the kitchen packing some things away in boxes, and I started hearing this banging noise coming from upstairs in one of the bedrooms, and it actually sounded like somebody stamping their feet. And this went on for about 10 seconds or so. So I went upstairs, walked into the bedroom where I thought this noise was coming from, and by the time I got halfway up the stairs, this banging had stopped. So I went back downstairs again, went into the kitchen again, carried on packing away, and this banging started again, and it was like somebody jumping up and down. It was really heavy footfalls. So the same thing again, went back up, got halfway up the stairs and it stopped. Went up into the bedroom, nothing there, nobody there. Came back down again, carried on packing the things away, and for the third time, all this commotion upstairs started up again. So by this point, I thought to myself, right, well, whoever it is that's up there is obviously unhappy that I'm packing a load of stuff away, and we're moving out of the house. And I went to the bottom of the stairs and I shouted. I could hear this banging going on upstairs, and I went to the bottom of the stairs and I shouted up the stairs something along the lines of, "Will you beep 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 pack it in? I'm trying to do some work down here. I'm trying to get this stuff packed away. We're moving out at the weekend, and blah blah blah." And oh, by the way, my mum's buying the house. Now, you know me mum because she's been round and you've met her, and you know who she is, so you know who's moving in. So yeah, so I shouted up the stairs, stop what you're doing. My mum's buying the house, she's moving in, you know who she is, you've met her before, she's been here before, so there's no need to get upset about it, you know who's moving in. And it stopped. The banging
that
stopped.
Satisfied him. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, I think I did. Yeah. And I remember telling Sarah when she came home from work, I said, "You never guess what happened this afternoon." I told her the story, and she was not surprised at all. You know, it was just something that we lived with. We always felt that there was something or somebody else still, you know,
residing in the house.
Yeah, still living in the house. Yeah. And strangely enough, sorry, go on.
You know, but over each other here. I'm sorry about this, but this is something that happens with this Skype. We do end up talking over each other. Can't see your mouth, so I don't know when you're talking or when you're going to be talking. But in this house, when we first moved in, we were getting all sorts of problems. And me and my husband stood in the kitchen. We've done more or less the same thing. We said, look, this is still your house. We're only here to look after it, because if we don't move into this house and look after it, it's going to fall down. It's in need of repair. We need to make sure that the house is nice for you to carry on living here. And things calm down.
Yeah. It's ghost psychology.
Yeah.
Well, it is. I think you have to reason with them sometime, don't you? But it's strange because, as I said, my mum moved into the house and she's lived there now for probably 12 years. Must be about 12 years ago when she moved in. And I've asked her on numerous occasions, have you ever seen anything? Have you ever heard anything? Have you ever had any strange experiences? And she just says no, nothing at all. And I think some people are more susceptible. Some people can pick up on these things more than others. And I think I'm just fortunate, and certainly Sarah's quite similar. She's quite perceptive as well, and I think we're just fortunate to be able to pick up on these things, and perhaps more so than other people.
Yeah, like you also, we went to the chapel down in the next village where Herbert and his wife are buried, and visited the grave and some flowers and sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Sarah used to take James out when he was a baby, for walks in his cot or in his buggy or whatever, and she regularly used to go up to the church and go and speak to these two ladies and fill them in on what had been going on and the gossip around the village and everything else, and it seemed to keep them happy and placate them.
They obviously liked her.
Well, yeah, they were obviously upset that they thought we were moving out, so that was quite quite strange.
Yeah, it makes you think about the intelligence of these spirits, doesn't it? How they're able to understand us, know that when we know that, like I know that my ones, touch wood, are not nasty in any way. They're the same, like the instinct about us knowing that we're good or whatever, and we don't mean any harm. And
yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, both myself and Sarah heard somebody one summer's evening. Again, James was he was born in October, so if it was the middle of summer, he'd probably been about 8 or 9 months old. We heard a lady singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and we both heard it from different parts of the house, and yet it was coming from inside the house, and we both ran upstairs to James's bedroom, half expecting to see, to find a woman standing there singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to him, and of course we got into his room and there wasn't. But we both heard this person singing, and it wasn't anything frightening. It wasn't a scary thing at all. It was, if anything, it was quite sweet. But we never pinned it down to who was doing it again.
how much time have we got, Stephen?
I think we're actually over a bit.
We're over a bit, so we better close now. Right, so the title of your book is The Shadow Man of It's
The Shadow Man of Accrington. It's ACCRINGTON. It's on Amazon. It's a paperback and also in Kindle format. So if you would like to put my name into the search engine, it's Craig Bryant, so that's CraigBryant, and it should pop up on the screen for you. I've also got a website as well, if I can just mention the website. That's the shadowmanofAccrington.co.uk. And that's the website associated with it as well. I'm also on Facebook, the Shadow Man of Accrington's Facebook page, and also Twitter as well. If you just look for the Shadow Man of Accrington, it should come up with a Twitter account as well.
Okay, lovely. Right, we're going to have you back.
Thank you.
Because we have not spoken about the Pendle Witches. I'm saving that for another show.
Well, that's certainly a long story. And an interesting one.
Yeah, well, I hope it can run for 2 hours on the next that we have you in. So what I'm going to do is I'll contact you again later on tomorrow and rebook you for another show.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Okay. Sorry for the interference, everybody. We have had a bit of problem holding on to Skype tonight, but I think we've managed to get through it, haven't we, Steve?
Yeah. Well, the stories are so interesting. I think everybody will be forgiving about the technical parts.
Well, I hope so.
Well, it wouldn't be Skype. It would be Paranormal UK Radio if we didn't have a few hiccups.
There we go.
Well, thank you for accompanying me today, Stephen.
Oh, yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. And thank you for being a guest, Craig.
Thank you for having me on. It's been wonderful. It's been really nice to talk to you about it.
And I'm sorry I spoke over you a few times. You know, if I could see you moving your mouth, that would be a lot easier. You never know when someone else is talking and when they're not, and it's very difficult with all this equipment I'm wearing and one thing or another.
I think we've done quite well, though, haven't we? I think it's worked out okay. Yeah.
I hope so. We'll know tomorrow. But the show will be out tomorrow, everyone. Today. Today. It's coming out today. Because Wednesday. Yes, today. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for coming on. Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Stephen. And I'm sure you'll be telling me off later on for something I've done wrong.
Me?
Thank you both.
And let's hope Mark gets well.
Yeah. Get well, Mark.
Yeah, and for anybody that doesn't know where to find us, we can be found everywhere. iTunes, TuneIn Radio, TalkStream Live, on the clouds, wherever